Hi, everyone. Hello, hello, hello. Thank you guys for joining us. We're going to get started here in just one more minute. We're so glad that you were able to join us today, the 1 hour to up your change management game. And happy Valentine's Day. So, yay. Thank you for being a part of this on this day just filled with this absolute love. And as we were talking before we started the webcast, absolute forgetfulness. Like, what day is it again? Oh, I should probably do something about that. So hopefully you guys have not made those same errors. And as I said, we'll get started in just 1 second. If you do me a favor, if you guys could just respond and tell me where you guys are at around the globe, that's always a good icebreaker to see where everyone is at, because I see our room filling up here virtually, and it's always intriguing to me to figure out where people are sitting and what time zone you're in. That's really what I'm curious about, because some of you make this happen no matter what. So let's see what we got. Toronto, Canada. Very cool, Daria. That's awesome. That's where my people are from. Very nice. What about the rest of you? Where are you guys? Annapolis, Maryland. All right. Albuquerque, New Mexico. Nashville, Tennessee. Hi from Detroit. Yes. Hello, Michelle. Very cool. All right. This also allows you to test out the functionality of the room and helps you figure out how to communicate with us, because you guys are all on mute. And this is the best way and the only way, therefore the best way to communicate with us during the webinar. If you have questions, concerns, issues, this is how you can get in touch with us, and we'll make sure that we get to you. I have a London, UK, a State College, PA. I'm in Philadelphia, Kathy. So hello, you're right down the road from me. Very cool. St. Paul, very nice. Hello, hello. Awesome. This is so nice. So if you just joined us, welcome. We are introducing ourselves by way of telling each other where we are located in the world. Another Detroit, Michigan. Hi, Mike. How are you? Very cool. Awesome. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and dock this because we have so much information to get through. I want to not waste any time. So those of you who haven't seen me before, my name is Melissa Sims. I serve as the Thought Leadership Chair. I am joined here today by my illustrious colleague, Allison, who's behind the scenes making sure that all the levers are pushed. She's kind of like the little man behind the curtain who says nothing to see here. Meanwhile, she's the brains behind the operation. I just happen to be the face. We lost out on this one, right? I apologize for what you have to see. So that being said, I am so pleased to have with us today Michelle Yanahan, who is the principal and owner of ChangeFit 360. She holds a master's in organizational behavior from Benedictine University, as well as CCMP and ProSci ADCAR certifications, which if you've been through that mess, you know that's not an easy thing to secure. She is a passionate organizational change management strategist. She has proven expertise in executing programs to deliver organizational change management as a strategic business competency. She's been featured as a presenter for, let's see here, AT&T, ATD, Change Management Review, the OD Network, PMI, SHRM, and so we were very grateful to welcome her into her fold. We're very grateful for her time and her willingness to come on here and present to us today. And today, as promised, as you saw when you signed up for this webinar, we are going to discover 3 practical ways that we can include behavior in how we execute our next change to help us gain traction. And as we all know as change management practitioners, getting change to stick is the tricky little minx. And that being said, I'm going to go off camera here, turn everything over to Michelle's slide deck. And if you have questions or concerns, message us, and we will be able to relay information between each other, and we'll get everything you need to know answered. All right. Yeah. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, Melissa. I'm definitely feeling the love over here in Chicago. So I'm in Chicago, so I can relate to the Detroits and some of the other Midwest and Eastern areas that are probably still in the snow and ready to get out of the doldrums and get into some warmth. So thank you guys very much. I'm thrilled to be here today with you on this lovely day for Change Management Institute, and I appreciate all your time and the wonderful introduction that the group has given me. As Melissa said, we're going to focus on 3 things today, specifically a behavior-based approach to change and how that is different from how we traditionally drive change management. So I'm going to make the case for that. We'll talk about behavior. What is behavior, and specifically, what is the behavior cycle, and how do we leverage that when we're driving change? And probably the most important is practical ways to implement. So how do we actually use this stuff and layer it into or accelerate what we're already doing? Think of the behavior-based approach as not a kind of brand new approach, but more as an add-on. And I think it's important that you walk away with learnings and insights that you can directly use that are practical and simple to use. So I make that a point of stating that we're going to be doing that. So that's where we're going to focus today. And thank you, Melissa, for setting that up this morning. If you do have questions or the chat, please use those throughout the conversation. I do encourage that. And Melissa and Allison will be helping me, kind of breaking me at different points so we can talk about your questions and make sure those get answered. So appreciate that. So I'd like to start by talking about why we even focus on change at all. And I think it sounds kind of silly in talking with Change Management Institute and a group of change practitioners to kind of articulate why we focus on change. But I think oftentimes when we're dealing with stakeholders and leaders, they know they need change, but they're not sure exactly the business value of change. And perhaps this definition helps put more finality or clarity on that. So I always think about change in terms of securing business benefits and goals, right? We're doing a project and change for a reason, right? We're not just doing it for the fun of it. So there's always a business benefit or goal that we're going after. And if when we're driving change, we can actually show that we're minimizing the amount of people disruption associated with that change. Anytime we have change, we know there's people disruption, even if it's change we like. So if we can show that we've minimized the amount of that time and we've minimized or lessened the time required to move people from current to future state, we can really show that the value of our actions against securing the business benefits and goals. And there's kind of a third piece that I like to put in here in this definition as well. And that's really by doing this on a project by project or program basis, we're really building a change adaptive or change resilient culture. And I think for organizations, individuals, and teams, a change adaptive culture is really important. Those organizations that innovate and do change well within their organizations, I feel have a better life expectancy versus some of the other organizations that we've seen kind of crumble as of late, some of the retail organizations, thinking back, Blockbuster, et cetera, right? They weren't able to innovate and or change quickly enough and their business became extinct. So I think building a change adaptive culture or resiliency in our culture is really, really important. So what I'd like to do is have you guys chime into the chat here. We're going to kind of do this the old-fashioned way. I'd like you to think about your current methods of driving change, whatever you do in your organization, your team, or individually today to drive change, whatever execution framework, methodology, tool set you use. And I'd like you to talk about, do you think the current methods of driving change today that you're using truly deliver to the business benefits or goals of your project? Just say yes or no here. And again, this is a perception and we're not taking any of this back to anybody. It just helps me understand where the group is. Do our current methods of driving change truly deliver the business benefits and goals of our projects? Yes or no? Into the chat, please.
All right. We have a mixed bag here, Michelle.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's see, some no's and some yeses. We're pretty equally divided, just so you know.
Good. Okay. Thanks for that.
Qualifiers. Yeah. Some like yes, but it's relying on leadership support. Some say no, but organization is changing how it manages change. So there you go.
Very good. Thank you. And that's pretty consistent with what I've heard. And what I'll do as I go through today's session, I'll also talk about some experiences I've had. So in a previous life, before I started ChangeFit 360, I was head of change capability for a Fortune 500 organization in the globe. And we did a study where we looked at our change projects against what was being measured for our change projects against what the project goal or ROI was. And in doing that study, I realized that I could not easily surmise between what we were measuring and what the business benefits and goals are. We didn't have clear alignment. So we were on the 50% side of the house that said, nope, we don't really have clear alignment or we're not truly delivering business benefits or goals. And that was an eye-opener for me in terms of how we think about projects, how we structure, strategize, execute, and measure. And again, we'll get into all that in the rest of today. So thank you guys for engaging in that. And again, kind of building on my experience, and again, we have a 50-50 split here, so this may be atypical to what you're doing in your organization, but lots of organizations, my old organization included, typically manage change in a project-by-project view, meaning a single project had, its change strategy plan, execution metrics, resources, etc. And project 2 had the same, project 3 had the same, project 4 had the same, a very project view, silo view of change. Very much driven by our tools and templates, our framework and methodology, kind of a step-by-step process of how we execute change within a project. By it being a project view, we had sort of what I'll call a single silo view of change, that we're very focused on one project. And so the change that project is delivering is where my focus area is. And I'm laser focused on that. And there's lots of other changes happening within the organization, other projects, other business initiatives, etc. But my focus is very silo viewed. The other thing that we had, and it may reflect your organization or not, is we were measuring or we were grabbing data for change, but I would call it scattered or inconsistent. Another thing that I was tasked with was building a scorecard to see how we were doing on change and were we, in fact, moving the needle on business benefits and goals for change. And one thing I very quickly saw in that analysis is we had apples to oranges, or fruit salad, as I like to call it, look of data. So with that, you could kind of say within a single project how we were doing, but not across a portfolio. And again, this may not be completely reflective of where your organization is at, but lots of the organizations I work with in my practice today, as well as where I came from, this was my experience. So I started looking at how do we really move the needle. And one thing I said is that, people don't adapt and or adopt to change project by project, but yet we execute and manage change in that way. So we really need to be looking at everything on their desk, if you want to look at it that way, what I call a business capability view, meaning that, if I'm a salesperson, what are all the different sales projects initiatives that are hitting against me? And maybe we could even take that into, if we're talking sales, maybe it's lead generation or something more focused. And then trying to connect dots, because people do not, project 1, project 2, project 3, project 4, those project names kind of mean nothing to people in the general population. We're so laser focused on them. But when people are change target and they're adapting and adopting to change, it's really the summation of all of those. So thinking about things in a business capability view and thinking about change from a portfolio view, all the different projects and initiatives that are happening, and looking for dependencies, and that sounds familiar, but also connection points. Where can we make change feel less heavy? Where can we connect dots between like types of projects, maybe like impact or like stakeholder groups? Where can we tick and tie communications, training, readiness checks, surveys, right? Making change feel less heavy. Another thing I've heard in most folks I work with is that we have too much change, right? We're just saturated by change. So this allows us, using capability and portfolio, allows us to make it feel a little less heavy and a little bit more tied together. And finally, this idea of behavior, right? Really understanding the behaviors that are needed to drive change and focusing our efforts around behavior and the data that supports it. So this is kind of a mind shift, if you will, guys. But again, underscored here by this idea that we're not throwing out the way we do change today. We're just looking to accelerate or add on a couple things in order to give us this more broad view and to have this behavior focus. And again, feel free to comment on the chat as we move through. So that sounds fine. What about the science behind this, or the research and statistics around behavior-based change? What do they tell us, and why would this approach benefit me as a change practitioner? Let's think about behavior. Let's talk first about behavior and kind of the behavior cycle, and then I will take this and put it against a change project that we're working on. So behavior in and of itself, I'll define as an action that we do. And we all do thousands, hundreds of thousands of actions within a given day, right? Any action we do, we can consider a behavior. There are a few things that we know about behavior. One is that behavior is learned. So generally it starts with our family structure, and then it's influenced by our peer group and social group, so it's learned. Behavior is observable and measurable. Generally, I do something or I don't do something, right? So we can measure, did we do it, did we not? And behavior is generally done to gain something or to avoid something. So we're either doing something in order to gain something or in order to completely avoid it. And if we think about behavior in that way, and let me build this slide here, all behavior, actions that we do, doesn't just happen for happenstance sake, right? There is a trigger that happens before I do a behavior, and then that behavior will either continue or cease based on my reinforcement or consequences that I receive. And a great way to think about this, and most people are familiar with this, is Pavlov's dog. Old experiment of conditional behavioring done many, many years ago, where the dog, a bell would ring, that was the predecessor. The dog would salivate, that was the behavior, and the dog was rewarded or reinforced with food. The dog continued to do that behavior because of the reinforcement. And over time, when the bell rang, the dog would salivate, and the food was no longer needed in order to create that cycle. So the behavior continued. The dog got the reward or reinforcement, and the behavior continued. Okay. And there's been a lot more research done on that operant conditioning. Skinner and others, not to get too scientific here, but have repeated that cycle of behavior. And that's generally how behavior works. Predecessor, behavior happens, and then reinforce and consequent either ceases the behavior, cycle stops, or it continues. And if we think about that, let's think about behavior in our example here is a project that we're doing the change for. So a project that, and let's call it a system project. I think most folks can relate to that. And so the behavior we're looking for in this example is that people use the system for a couple different transactions. So there's unique transactions that we're launching a system for that we want people to use. That's the behavior that we're trying to get in order to get the business benefits or ROI out of this system launch. Okay. So as a change professional, we will do some work here before that system launches in order to trigger people to use that system. So in the chat function, what are some things that we might do as change professionals in order to trigger behavior of folks to use a system? So people-facing actions or activities that we might do in order to get people to use that system. Go ahead and put in the chat room some ideas.
Okay. Waiting for people to respond. I know you guys have mad ideas, but you're probably typing furiously.
Mad ideas sent with love. How about that?
That's it. Always. Drip announcements. Process dictates that they use it, so they can't get their results without it. Process signal, for example, request from a customer.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So those are great ideas, and I'm just going to add on to them. If we're doing a system implementation, maybe we do a UAT, maybe we do a pilot. You guys mentioned communications. Maybe we do some change readiness. Are people ready to use this system? Is training ready? Potentially some procedures and process maps, job aids and guides, and our list could go on and on and on. And these are all things we as a change professional, as part of a project or initiative, would be involved with or responsible for. So let me ask you guys a different question that I'll have you, again, put into the chat here. What percentage of your time on any given project as a change professional do you spend working on these triggers or predecessors? So pre-launch actions prior to implementation of your change. How much time, approximately percentage, do you spend in a given day on these activities? What percentage of time do you think you spend on the pre-launch activities?
Running the gamut, but it's still pretty high there, Michelle. So 95, 90, someone said 60, someone said 40, 80%.
Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe we split the difference, guys, and it's about 65, 70%. Okay, let's go with that. All right, so we're going to step away from that for a second, and we're going to talk about reinforcement and consequences. So again, in our system implementation, we've launched the system, we've done these activities, people are out trying the system, doing those transactions. What do we do? What are some ideas or thoughts or actions that folks do to reinforce and or consequent that behavior once the change goes live. So as a change practitioner, what are some ideas or actions that you do to help reinforce or consequence usage of that system? I'll give you guys a second to respond to that.
We have auditing coming in, manager rounding, reporting.
Great.
Publish positive results like good job messages, post support drop-ins.
Great. Excellent. Here are some other ideas. In addition to all those great ones you guys provided, providing feedback and coaching, providing maybe some tangible rewards, maybe some swag, gift cards, pay raise, bonus, promotion, performance plan, and pay cut. So I want to focus on the bottom three here: pay raise, bonus, promotion, performance plan, and pay cut. Who in your organization has the most responsibility for delivering pay raise, bonus, promotion, performance plan, or pay cut? Who has the most responsibility for doing that within your organization? And go ahead and chime in on the chat room again here.
The direct manager, leadership team, HR in conjunction with managers.
Excellent. Great. So we're hearing a lot of manager and leadership there. Okay, one more question off the back of this. How much time as a change practitioner do you spend actioning activities for reinforcement and consequences? We said about 65-70% up here on the triggers, if you remember. What percentage of time are you focused on some of these type of activities, or working with managers and leaders specifically? I'll just give you a second. Melissa will let me know what we're hearing there.
So it just came in a big smush. 20%, not much, says somebody. 30%, probably not enough, says another person.
Good. Okay, good. So you guys are no different than most of the classes or the participants I've worked with. You know, we're more heavily focused usually on the triggers. So here's the interesting thing that behavioral science tells us. Behavioral science, and my resource here is Steve Jacobs' The Behavior Breakthrough. It's a great book about behavioral science and its impact on change. A bunch of PhDs and people much smarter than me have done research against this. And what they've shown is that 20% of what matters for sustainable change, so sticky, sustainable change, getting to sustainment, is dependent on what happens up in our trigger bucket. Only 20% of what matters for sustainable change is based on this. 80% is based specifically on how managers or leaders, people leaders, use their leverage, their power and authority with the rewards and consequences down here. 80%. Okay, so 20%, 80%. And if we reflect back on what you guys told me, we said 70% of us or so are more focused here and about 20% focus here. So that's in direct kind of, it's not in order with what science tells us. If you think about it, that kind of makes sense. Think about an individual contributor. The individual contributor doing the behavior is getting their priority and direction from their manager, and indirectly, they're getting their pay. So what my manager or line leader cares about, I care about, right? It becomes my priority. If my line leader or manager never says a word about the system usage, is not tracking metrics, is not coaching me on it, never brings it up in conversation again, how important is it that I continue over on the system if I have another system I can go to? Okay? So that's what that's saying. So to me, I don't know about you guys, that's kind of a game changer to think about. You know, we're really focused here, and we're not saying this isn't important to do, but what really matters is here. So again, when I learned this after years of doing this type of work, it was kind of a game changer, but it makes sense. And it also kind of speaks to, you know, if we put more effort and focus on what we do pre-launch, not that it's not important, sorry guys, I keep doing that, our chances of sticky or sustainable change if it goes up, if we do more up here, that's probably more happenstance than really what science is telling us, right? So really the takeaway here is if in fact we can figure out for our projects what the critical key behaviors are that deliver ROI and business benefits, why we're doing the project in the first place, and then we build our strategy and plan and execution around the behavior model. So all of our pre-work is focused on the behaviors that we need to see, and we coach the line leaders on those behaviors and how to reinforce and consequent them. We should have better success or chance of sticking change. Again, kind of a game changer in terms of what we might have heard. I'm going to move forward, but I want you guys to go ahead and comment in the chat room. To further make the point, and I'll take a break after this slide and let Melissa chime in on anything we're hearing. To further sort of show this point, this comes from a source, IBM Institute for Business Value, Making Change Work While the Work Keeps Changing. This is a 4-year-old study, but I still find a lot of value in it. So IBM looked at 1,100 organizations that were of different sizes in different industries. And what they were looking for is why those industries were able to stick transformative change, so sustained transformative change, more so than their partner industries, right? Why were they able to have a better rate of sustainment more than that 30 or 40% that we always hear? And what IBM found was there were 3 kind of core characteristics, and they're big chunks that those organizations had that other organizations didn't. And they were all based around behavior. And so those 3 chunks were the ability to create leader behavior or lead at all levels, be a change leader at all levels of an organization. So up, down, and across the organization, that's what these little lines are representing. Building change leadership, not as a leadership skill, but throughout the organization to allow people to drive change. So building those behaviors within the whole workforce to drive and create change resiliency was part of their success measures. The second one, building change muscle. So building the muscle to do change, making it part of what we do every day, making it a performance management characteristic, thinking about investing in change and how people adopt and adapt to change and innovation. And the third one was making understanding people mattering change. So understanding the people impact of change, really pulling that into how we drive change. And again, I will give you guys this, for those that are Change Management Institute members, you'll get this report. The rest of you just Google this and you'll be able to find it. Great study. So if we think about that, why I say this is an accelerator with what we currently do. If we think about traditional change management and traditional project management, what we know about a typical project, let's just say, is there's a distinct beginning and end, and there's steps that we go through, very much linear, that we go through in driving a project, right? And when we think about traditional change management, right, we have steps that we go through, probably through our project phases or change stages that we do that are very linear, okay? So we need to continue to do that from a change perspective because that provides our guide rails, that kind of gives us our order, fits very nicely into how we manage a project, and that provides our framework, and again, a very orderly way to go through change. So we know we need those. But what if we also added on coaching managers and leaders and building leadership behaviors to build change resiliency throughout an organization? And behind that all, kind of carve everything around this behavior model, including coaching leaders and managers about the behaviors we need and how to best reinforce and consequent those. Okay? If we did that, we would use, again, our traditional change management, and I like to say that we would accelerate our chance of sustainment. We'd be very focused on what behaviors we need, and we'd be engaging those leaders and managers to help us get that 80% of what matters off the back end of our implementing change. Okay? So I want to take a quick pause here and see what if anything, Melissa's got in the chat room, what people are thinking about that we might want to raise here.
So this is your opportunity to send in anything that you are Any questions, concerns, comments? I will tell you, Michelle, folks were very interested in the book that you had mentioned, and that I found it. It's The Behavior Breakthrough, Leading Your Organization to a New Competitive Advantage by Steve Jacobs. And so for those of you who sent those questions, and I responded to you. Michelle, one question, what's the name of the IBM study?
The name of the IBM study is Making Change Work While the Work Keeps Changing. Making Change Work While the Work Keeps Changing.
Perfect.
If you Google that, you can find it. For those folks, for the Steve Jacobs book, page 50 and 51 talks about that 80-20 split that I mentioned. Just if people are very, I like to be very detailed. So there you go. Excellent. So again, if we think about kind of taking your behavior model, change management, you guys told me 70% of you-ish, 65, 70% were more predecessor focused, right? So that's great. We continue to do that work. Where this builds us is on our reinforcement and consequences. By building change leadership across the organization, and particularly in our line leaders and people managers, we are able to better support reinforcement and consequences, which again is responsible for that 80% stick rate. Okay. All right. I think that I'm going to share this with you, and then we're going to do a poll real quick. So if we take what I've said sort of as a backdrop for where we're going, the three topics that I want to focus most heavily on the remainder of today are this idea of identifying and pinpointing critical behavior for change, talking about how we coach leaders once we have those behaviors around behavior change in the model that we just talked about, and then finally, how do we measure what matters? How do we measure the behavior that we're talking about and what matters? And how do we measure it according to how people actually adapt and adopt change? Okay, so those are the three things that we're going to spend the majority of, or the rest of our time on. But what I'd like to first do to kind of kick off the IDing behavior piece is have you guys participate in a poll. Allison is going to launch our poll for us here. And our poll is going to be around imagining that you guys are my sales leaders in an organization. And I'm asking you as your head of sales or your chief of sales that, we really need to increase our sales by 10% this quarter over last. And there are 5 or 6 behaviors that we could look at, we could do some analysis on to determine, how we help increase our sales. We've got a goal of increasing our sales. So as my sales leaders chime in, select which of the behaviors, I believe you can only select one, you would recommend to me as your sales or your head of sales as, let's do some more analysis on this and then that'll help us better drive to our end goal. Okay, so the poll is open. So go ahead and respond to that poll. And when we've got a good percentage in, Allison, if you'd be so kindly to reflect that back out to the group.
Yes, we're currently at 50%.
All right, we'll give it another minute or two.
Okay, I'm going to close the poll in a second. If you're waiting to vote, please get it in. See, it's popping up right now.
Perfect.
Okay, I'm going to close the poll and share results.
Are people seeing the results?
Yes, they are.
Okay, I cannot see it. So you guys will, if you could be kind enough to tell me kind of what you're seeing, that'd be fabulous.
Yes, the lead answer was interview salespeople at 53%. Second to that is save new customer contact information at 27%. Third is schedule a monthly order for existing customers for January 2018 at 20%. And the remaining 2 did not receive any votes.
Great. Thanks, guys. Thanks for playing along with that. All right. So here's our goal. And of those 5 behaviors, This one, in fact, is the most closely related to the goal, or the most pinpointed behavior. All of those other goals, and I'll explain a little bit more about this in a second, all those other goals are what I would call supporting information. Not that it wouldn't be important to go interview the salespeople or look at some of the data that you guys recommended, that 80% of us recommended. Certainly there's value in doing that. But when we're IDing or pinpointing critical behavior, we're really looking for behavior that is most specific and directly aligned to our goals. Again, what we're trying to do here is say, if people did these 3 to 5 behaviors for any given project/change, I would be able to directly relate my change measurements to our business goal, which is the sales goal here. What I will tell you about this example, and people go ahead and type into the chat here. The behaviors that I gave you in this example are vague on purpose. Really, this is just meant to show that there's work, in identifying the most critical behaviors, and it's not as easy to just say, oh, it's this one or that one. But really what we're trying to do is, when we get put on a project, think about what are the 3 to 5 behaviors by change target group that really would deliver the goal, and then orchestrate our whole change strategy, plan, and execution and measures around that. So we have direct alignment, and we no longer have fuzziness about, well, change did X, Y, and Z, but I'm not sure what value they created towards the bottom line. Okay? So this is in direct alignment to support of the business benefits or goals. And again, feel free to chime in here. That example is, we could argue back and forth on what the right answer is. And I would say really there's no right answer, but this one is the most closely aligned. So let me just build this slide here. So the idea, again, is when we get assigned a new project, or we're looking at a project very early on, thinking about, first of all, understanding the business benefits or goals that we're going after and our change, how it can best support those. Thinking about the critical business behaviors that would deliver those business benefits, and then identifying if there are differences among stakeholder or change target groups. And then using those behaviors as the foundation of our execution, strategy, change plan, and measurements. And again, the idea of all this is to have a very clear line of sight into the business benefits or goals, and reduce all that fuzziness that exists around, I know I need change, but I'm not quite sure why. What value are they actually providing? Okay. And so I like to say not all behaviors are created equal. Because certainly in the last example, interviewing salespeople as an example would have been a great thing to do, and we would have got a lot more insights, but it wasn't directly related to the goal. So not created equal in terms of that. Okay. All right, so that's IDing behavior, a little bit about behavior, how it relates, and this idea of identifying behavior early on to create the best plan. Secondly, that idea of coaching leaders. When we think back, reflect back on our behavior model, you guys told me line leaders and people leaders own the reinforcement and consequences primarily. We don't spend enough time there, and I said that quote or statistic around the 80%. So how do we go about coaching leaders for behavior change? How do we start? We can't eat the whole apple here, but how do we start in? Well, first of all, I think we need to start with understanding sort of where leaders are at in their perception of how they drive change. And so this is ProSci from one of their best practices yearly studies. And if you look at this, I think about 1,500 leaders, ProSci users, obviously, that are included in the study, were asked their effectiveness at doing different activities for their team during driving change. So I'll start with the right side. 70 to 80% of the leaders responded, and again, this is their perception, that they were effective at communicating for change, advocating for change, which I look at advocating as advocating for their team, what their team needs back and forth, and liaising with a project team. So leaders' perception is people leaders that they're pretty effective at communicating, advocating, and liaising for change. Where they saw opportunity, 80 to 83% of those same leaders said they were not effective at coaching their teams for change, and managing and identifying change readiness falls underneath that coaching piece. And I don't know about you guys, I was a people leader at one point, and the idea of, oh gosh, there's that person again and they want to vent to me about this. I didn't look forward to that. So that doesn't necessarily surprise me that leaders rated their ability, their perceived ability to coach and sort of draw out people that are illustrating change resistance as a big surprise. So that's how leaders rated their performance. So the other thing that I found very interesting, and let me just build this slide, is I don't know if anybody's familiar with the Google Oxygen Project. The Google Oxygen Project, I'm sure people are familiar with Google, Google started out as 8 great leader behaviors, and they've since expanded it. In 2010, Google did a study of their best people managers. And what they were really looking to do is identify the characteristics of the behaviors within those best people managers that they could then use to onboard and build other people managers. And they said, we're going to look at people managers that have what we consider the most productive employees, the happiest or most engaged employees, and the best retained employees. So those were kind of the 3 levers, if you will, that they said, let's find a group of managers that fit that kind of vernacular. And so they developed the 10 great leader behaviors and built a whole kind of onboarding and coaching program around these behaviors. And what I will tell you about these behaviors is they are not in priority order other than number 10. And number 10 is specifically around this idea that a leader needs to possess basic functional and or technical skills that are relative to the team, what the team is producing. Right? So again, what this means is, if I manage a team of IT programmers, I don't need to be in the weeds of all the code, but I need to understand in general kind of coding and what goes into it, which makes sense. So the first top 9 are in no particular order, but top 10 was dead last. And so is there anything, please chime into the chat room here, is there anything that strikes you about the first 9 of these 10 great leader behaviors? The first 9 of them, anything strike you?
We're waiting for people to respond. They're all soft skills. If it's the servant leadership model, someone else said all soft skills.
Perfect. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
These are all soft or emotional intelligence skills, right? They have nothing to do with IQ, right? They're all about EQ, right? The emotional intelligence skills or the soft skills. And if you think about it, really great leader behavior or really great leaders focus more heavily, at least in my experience, on the soft skills. They see the value of these emotional skills, emotional intelligence skills. And so what struck me about this is, yes, the top 9 are all EQ skills. And if we're thinking about leaders in change, isn't the leader's role in change really to drive with their team these skills, right? So if we looked at these 10 skills and we said, oh, if I'm thinking about a leader's role in change, these are things that I would want a leader to do in driving change. And I could take these and I could say, oh, there are probably amongst these 10 great leader behaviors 4 different roles that I might say these fit into. And so I put them into 4 different roles: the role of communicator, the role of coach, the role of advocate, and the role of liaison, with the idea of resistance manager being under the coaching piece. And let me talk you through this. So I think when, as a good leader, if you're driving change, certainly you need to be a good communicator within your team. And this idea of active listening, really listening to the team and then reacting, which I'm really bad at. Not sure about you guys, but being a good communicator, not only pushing and pulling messages, but also engagement, like the ability to really build trusted relationships with my team and then communicate effectively. So I feel that that's a really, again, in communication for change from a leader role, that's really important. Certainly the ability to tick and tie or tie any change that we're driving within our team to the organizational vision, strategy, mission is important, so connecting the dots, but also being able to tie it to our team's vision and mission. Why does the team care? What's in it for the team, right? Translating that change, maybe that strategic language about the change, into something that matters and is meaningful for our team. That's very important for a leader to be able to do. So the role of communicator. If I look over on the role of coach, I think that helping the team, empowering the team to drive change and be creative and have a role in driving change and how it kind of builds within our team is definitely a way to empower the team and enrich job skills and, not micromanage. Allowing the team to be fully engaged into the change and have their handprint on how it goes out or how it grows within the team, I think is important. Certainly being interested in team success. What does success look like for our team within this change? Why does our team's success matter? What piece and part do we have of the overall organizational success within this change? Which is important. Creating an inclusive team environment that really we're thinking about the well-being, the wellness of people, understanding their carrots and motivators, and working, amongst that to create this really inclusive team environment, building a very strong team foundation, and leveraging a change as part of how we build our team. And finally, being a good coach, and really underneath that, so coaching for the right behaviors, but also looking at change resistance as a gift, being able to identify resistance amongst the team, and using the voicing of change resistance as an opportunity, not as something to be kind of shut down, giving a voice to change resistance and actioning it forward. And finally, this idea of advocating and liaising for change. I think when we enrich roles within a team to drive change, we've actually encouraged career development. Potentially, we're having people do things that they haven't done before as sort of their normal, regular job, and they're building their own individual and team change resiliency, and I look at that as enrichment. Certainly being results-focused or outcome-oriented. The idea to collaborate amongst the team and driving change. And again, very helpful for a leader, last but not least, to possess basic functional or technical skills to help coach and advocate the team for that change. So I think these fit very nicely amongst these roles. And I'll pause here and see if we have any commentary in the chat that we want to call out here.
Yes. So we have some questions that have been kind of bundling up, but one that is very relevant right now is any advice on how to coach a leader if they're not good at these soft skills?
Yes. So, again, I would say do it. Don't bite the whole apple off. But if there's an opportunity within your project to introduce this behavior model, or maybe within manager coaching or manager leadership at more the organizational level, bringing this in softly, maybe bringing in the behavior model and introducing it. I also have a guide that I wrote for leaders that I'm willing to give to anybody that would like. So make sure I hand that off to you, something that you could put in that they could read. And that's a great handoff. So let's hold that for the next slide, because I want to talk a little bit more about coaching leaders, but I don't want to miss anything else that's in the chat. So Melissa, is there any other key themes that we want to cover off as we look at this section?
This is going back just a tad, but they're very interesting questions that I'm sure you'd want to respond to. So one is, would this build leadership behaviors approach be linking to the behaviors of the company? So that goes back to kind of like the beginning when you were presenting.
Yeah, it could be. The company could have strategies or goals, and all of our projects are lined up to those. And so therefore, within the project, we're doing specific transactions or processes that support the project goals, that support the company goals. So yes, there could be a line of sight, absolutely.
Okay. And then what are ways to incentivize our leaders to use this approach, since it is somewhat dependent on them?
Yeah, so I really like this idea of leading with data. So if you talk about, if you have the CLG book or some other sources, bringing that to the forefront and let's just try this. I will tell you, in my organization, I created a little leader coaching program and started to put leaders through that as relative to projects we were doing. So understand, if you just do a project by project, you're just biting a piece of the apple, but that's better than nothing. So first of all, I think it's getting the word out on why, if we don't do this, sort of what are we leaving on the table, and you can probably look at some of your past change to say, if if we do this exactly how we've done it in the past, we shouldn't expect different results, right? Because that's what does Albert Einstein say? That's insanity, right? So why not introduce a little bit of this in and see what sticks? And I think really important is acting as a partner, not a threat. Here, that we know everything and we've got everything. So what I would say is the whole idea of behavior that we're talking about today, you bring it in, I call it, quote, light behavior. Bring it in a little bit at a time. Try to introduce it in, see what the organization's appetite for it is, and bring it in that way. And certainly, you guys will have me as a resource. I've got a lot more sort of behind the scenes on this if you want some more ideas. Okay. Certainly, we can't cover all this off in an hour. I have a whole course I do on this and some other things. So, one thing I want to close with here, this section is, managers and leaders don't assume they know how to drive change within their group. I know as a leader that I might have had management training kind of 101. I might have had HR type training. I might have even gone to a change management class. But remember, most traditional change management is very focused on tools and templates. And managers and leaders generally are not writing a change plan, right? They're looking for more, tell me what I need to do, change practitioner, to get this behavior going in my organization, my team, and kind of coach me through that. So I think it's safe to assume that most leaders don't know, and no fault of anybody, but we just haven't focused there, know how to drive change. And where we can help them and have them included in our communication engagement and sort of standing up this whole behavior model, all the better. Another thing I would say here is, if you can't get all this done in one project, but you can get little pieces and parts of including behavior, great. Right? We have to walk before we run. Understand that this is a shift change, and it brings in a lot of change in the way we're doing change. So any little kind of step you make towards this approach, I think, is a win. Okay. Really focusing leaders' efforts on triggering and reinforcing. So the behavior model above and beyond everything else. Right? If we can get that across the finish line with a couple leaders to understand that, and then coach them on a few activities to help their teams within the project, it's a win. And again, I like to underscore that, we want to be the coach to them that we would want to be, right? That, introduce this, maybe as, it's an add-on to what we're already doing. We want to test it out. We want to try something different. We'd love to pilot it with you. Would love to work with you. Love your insight on this versus kind of this, you must do approach. Okay. I think it's important as we walk through this to say kind of where might this fit as we're driving change. Again, back to this very linear idea of, when we drive change for a project, we have a beginning and an end. So what I've done is I've taken, this is the ACMP change standard process groups, probably similar to, very similar to something you guys might have for the Sandbox, and said, where would you look at doing these things? So very early on, you would identify behavioral measures, and it's blue, or that should be blue as well. We would be looking at these throughout the life cycle of driving our change. Okay. Finally, this whole idea of measurement. And I want to just take a quick peek. Ooh, we're running very short on time, so I'm going to kind of walk us through this. Okay, so I will summarize this very quickly. So oftentimes I think when we're looking at change, and I learned this within my organization, we were looking to measure kind of 30 or 60 days or 90 days post-implementation, and that date was somewhere drawn in the sand, willy-nilly date. And so what we did, and the approach that I now follow, is more of I'll call it more of a strategic and a timeline approach to measurement. And that says very simply that the first time we try something, put our foot in the water, it's adoption. Adoption has no kind of belief behind it. It's, putting your foot in the water. So the baby goes for his first swim, him or her first swim, that's adoption. Over time, as we're using the change, we become proficient. We gain quality, timeliness, and speed, right? Anytime we do something new, it takes us longer and we're more error prone. But as we do that more, we develop proficiency, okay? And finally, once we've completely developed proficiency, it becomes sustained or business as usual. So my example is the baby in the water, going to swim practice and honing our swimming skills. And finally, some of us turn into Michael Phelps, not everybody, but when Michael Phelps goes in the pool, it's just muscle memory, right? He's no longer thinking about, I have to practice my strokes. It's more muscle memory. And really what we're trying to do with change is get people over here to sustainment with less disruption and less time. And that kind of reflects back on where we started. So it's a process. And the idea being, if we only measure once in this process, it's sort of a willy-nilly date, we don't have an opportunity to course correct between these stages or find outliers that perhaps are performing better than other outliers. If you think about maybe a team or an office, if you look at data that way. So the suggestion here is thinking about measuring change through this 3-step process. And let me just build this very quickly due to time. So in most of our organizations, I assume we don't just have one project. So we have something that looks more like this. We have a project that maybe is a high impact change, and our adoption, proficiency, and sustainment is laying that out. In the middle of that project, we're launching another one. Oh, and by the way, we had another project that was already launched that people are still trying to get through. So the culmination of this is, again, thinking back, is that portfolio view or that business capability view that I mentioned, that people are not just looking at a project at a time, they're thinking about change sort of holistically. And so if I have a tool that I'm going to give you that will allow you to see sort of how things lay together for your portfolio of change. And you can look at that by impact. You can look at that by stakeholder group, by priority. And it helps you identify dependencies, connections, and the impact that other changes might have. And we can use this model with this whole idea of measuring behavior. But it's only as good as if we use the model and we measure all of our projects in a similar way. Okay? So again, I'm going to give you a portfolio that based on the impact of your project will say roughly the sustainment is this date, given the impact of the particular project. So a tool that will allow us to look at impact and sustainment. And again, we could look at measurement, behavior measurement in this way, as well as any other measurements. Okay. So I know I apologize, I had to kind of fly through that last piece, but you will be getting a tool off the back that will allow us to do that. So in summary, kind of closing out here, what we did is we talked about behavior-based change. I made a case for this behavior model, this 80-20, and the research behind it, as well as the IBM study, and how it would benefit us to think about adding some behavior into how we traditionally drive change management in order to improve our sustainment results and outcomes over time. We talked about at the front of that model is this idea of identifying the critical business behaviors that directly align to the business benefits or ROI of our project or change. With that, we can build our change strategy, plan, and measurements, and they are direct alignment to those business benefits or ROI, and we show our value against that. Part of that is coaching our leaders for the change roles, really teaching them about the behavior model and really about triggering, reinforcing, and sustaining critical behaviors. So putting a little bit more emphasis on that reinforcement and consequence piece of the model and starting to get our leaders, even if it's just a little bit, aware of the model and making a slight shift in how they drive change. Finally, we looked at the process of sustainment and this idea of how people sustain, adapt, and adopt to change, and this idea of measuring across the process and bringing behavior into that. And it's only as good as what we have that we're looking at in a portfolio and that we're measuring the same way. Whew. And that is, in a very quick summary, 3 tenets of behavior-based change. And again, off the bat, you'll get a little bit more information. So that's as much as we can cover in this hour. I want to pass it back to Melissa for any kind of closing comments and questions.
Yes, Michelle, thank you so much for your time. We are most appreciative. That was very informative. Everyone, I blasted out Michelle's information here, so it includes information on how to get on her website, along with your email address, Michelle. This way, I know some people were like, I'm curious about, learning more about your course and what have you. As you can see, it's right here on the screen too. I know in today's day and age when you can take a screenshot or you have a camera, you can get the same information right here. So very important if you want to continue this. As Michelle promised, for those CMI members that joined us today or that registered for this webinar, we will be blasting information out to you in an email. give me till tomorrow in order to make that happen, but an email from me will be forthcoming. And if you have any more questions for Michelle, I encourage you to reach out to her because, as you can see, she's a plethora for information and she can certainly help you. I have no doubt. So that being said, I also want to thank Allison for being behind the scenes and making it all work so magically delicious. I want to wish you all a very happy Valentine's Day and a great rest of your Thursday. I'm very appreciative that you joined us. Just a little shout out here. April 11th, we have our next thought leadership webinar. It's going to be on vinegar, honey, and change, communication imperatives for leading change. And it's going to be like nothing we've done before. So there's that. So that's it. Michelle, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it. And with that, you guys can close on out of here.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Happy Valentine's Day. And please do reach out. Thank you guys so much. Appreciate the time. Thank you.
Wonderful. All right. You guys can close on out of here, and you will see an email from me. Thank you. Okay. Have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.